Hello! So today I'm going to talk about 3 books I read whilst I was away. That's 4321 by Paul Auster, Lake By Ann Patchett, and Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. Now, I don't normally do multiple book reviews. I prefer to just read a book and review it and go a little bit more in depth. However, I'm just going to fall behind if I don't do all of these books in one hit. Also, all of these books were just too good for me to not review. I also just needed a break from the Booker long list, which has mostly been made up of books that I am finding painfully average. So let's start with 4321 by Paul Auster, first released in 2017 and also shortlisted for the Booker Prize that year. This is a beast of a book, coming in at 1,070 pages. Based around themes of nature versus nurture, coming of age, love, politics, writing, and what I would call what if. In this book, we follow Archie Ferguson. But not just one Archie Ferguson, we follow 4 Archie Fergusons. It's a kind of multiverse thing we have going on. Small different decisions ripple into multiple outcomes as we follow each Ferguson. And I know you're probably thinking, much like I did, well, that's not the most original idea, which it isn't. But Paul Auster just handles it so bloody well. We get a kind of prologue before Ferguson is born, backstory into his family and New York at that time, and then when Ferguson is born in around 1947, we follow that all the way until like the late 60s. The novel follows a fairly simple structure. 1.1 is Ferguson 1, Chapter 1, and then the next chapter will be 2.1, which is Ferguson 2, Chapter 1, then 3.1, Ferguson 3, Chapter 1, and then 4.1, Ferguson 4, Chapter 1. And that process repeats throughout the entirety of the book. It can be quite a challenging read at times because we spend vast amounts of time with each Ferguson. So by the time you eventually get back to, say, Ferguson number 1, it's a real struggle to remember what had happened and where we had left off. But I really love this book for that. It forced me to really remember what was happening, to concentrate, to focus. It just brought me into the story even more. And I can honestly say, the more you read, the more you get into this story, the more it progresses, the more you start to understand the differences between each of the Fergusons and their stories and what's happening to them. What I also loved about this novel is how small the differences are between the Fergusons. With a multiverse kind of story, usually the trope is that vastly different things happen to them. One person could become an astronaut and another person ends up in prison, but that's not the case with this book. It just doesn't veer off in crazy different directions. Obviously, vastly different things happen to Ferguson, but it is made up of loads of small things, loads of little moments that make small changes to him as a person. But yet, somehow, the same things keep happening in each story. A small example would be the character Amy Schneiderman. She is a recurring character in every single Ferguson story. She comes to him as a girlfriend, as a stepsister, and in one point a cousin, and he is always drawn towards her. All the Fergusons seem to be drawn towards writing and also to sport, especially baseball. The entire book covers around 25 years of Ferguson's life, and it goes into so much detail. I lived with these Fergusons, I watched them grow, and I learned to absolutely love each of them. So what did I like and what didn't I like? What I liked. I'm going to make this really, really quick. I pretty much loved absolutely everything. I love huge books and I absolutely adored getting lost in this one. I have read a vast amount of Paul Auster's stuff. I absolutely adore him as a writer, and there has been nothing that he has written that I haven't enjoyed. And I'm really happy that this book also did not disappoint. In fact, it far surpassed my expectations. The New York trilogy by Paul Auster is probably one of my favourite books ever written. Well, it would easily make the top 20 list, mainly for its impact on me as a reader at that time and how much it shifted my perceptions of what a novel could be. I wanted to hold it up, but I can't find it, and I think it's basically because I've bought New York Trilogy about 4 times now, and I always lend it out to people, and it never gets given back. There's only one thing I didn't like in this book, and it's a short story about shoes that one of the Fergusons writes. We have to read the entire story. It takes quite a lot of time. Now, I enjoyed the story, but in a book that is over 1,000 pages long, this short story, or having to read the entirety of it, just felt unnecessary. Extra bloating that just wasn't needed. I mean, I enjoyed the short story, I really did, but yeah, just when you're reading a 1,000-page book and you're really in the world of these different Fergusons and you're trying to remember the different routes, the different narratives taking place, to then stick this massive short story in there, yeah, it just felt unnecessary. But that's it. That's my one complaint. I absolutely loved everything else. This is, without a doubt, a surefire 5 stars out of 5. What's that, I hear you say? Better than Demon Copperhead, Andy? Yes. Yes, it is. For me, 100% easily better than Demon Copperhead. I loved it. So moving on, let's now talk about Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I haven't read anything by this author before, but I got a comment on a previous video, someone saying how this was one of their favourite reads of the year, and I just saw it in the shop, so I thought I would pick it up. Side note, I managed to pick up this limited edition signed copy of this book for £5 English. And the reason I got it for £5 is the fact that the sticker was slightly worn. I don't know, the person at the counter was like, oh, that could mean there's damage, we'll do it for a reduced price. I got very, very lucky. This is a story about love, theatre, acting, marriage and memory. In the spring of 2020, Lara's 3 daughters come back to the family orchard in northern Michigan. Now, the reason the 3 daughters have come back is because of COVID, and this book does everything in its power to sidestep ever actually having to say COVID. But it is quite obvious that's the reason why. In fact, it is trying so hard to not say the words COVID that for me, it took away from a bit of the realism of the story at play. I feel like if Ann Patchett didn't want to write a COVID story, then she should have set this story at a different time. I don't know, you might have been like me, but during that time, COVID is pretty much all we could talk about. It would get mentioned multiple times a day, even if you were trying not to talk about it. And the fact that this just sidesteps talking about it, or tries to talk about it in a really cryptic way, I don't know, it lost some points for me because it just failed to feel realistic. But I digress. So while Lara and her daughters are picking cherries, the 3 daughters beg her to tell them the story of Peter Duke. Peter Duke is a world-famous actor who Lara shared the stage with when she was younger at a theatre company called Tom Lake. She was also romantically involved with Peter. As Lara recalls the past, her daughters are forced to examine their own lives, their relationship with their mother, and they also start to question everything they thought they knew. This book is as cosy as they come. It's so simple in its writing style, but it just flows so well. I got properly lost in this one. There's zero flash in this novel. It's just doing one thing really simply, but it is doing that thing masterfully. So what did I like and what didn't I like? What I liked. Loved the writing style, loved the setting, and absolutely loved our protagonist, Lara. I also really enjoyed how deep this goes into the world of theatre and acting. The pacing was superb and the story had me hooked. I love the way it kept jumping in and out of the story, really nicely structured, really nicely balanced, and I really enjoyed how Lara would skip over some parts and then go back to go into a little bit more detail. It just worked really, really well. What didn't I like? I'm afraid to say that I could not stand the daughters. They're all adults in their 20s, but my lord, they are so entitled and so moany, I just couldn't stand them. Excuse my language, but I fucking hated the youngest daughter. And that is a massive shame because it's their interjections into the story that keep this flowing. It's their questions that really start to open things up. And yeah, I was just gutted that I really didn't like them. But aside from that, there's nothing I really didn't like. And even though I hated them, everything else in this book was just working so bloody well that it didn't really damage too much of my experience. I'm going to give this book 4 stars out of 5. I thought it was excellent. And finally, I read Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. I found this one in a charity shop for, you're not going to believe it, 10p. Now, this book has been around for a while. First released in 2004, it was a winner of a Pulitzer Prize, and it has appeared on multiple lists of one of the best books written in the 21st century. So there was a lot of hype going into this one. And I can't believe it has taken me so long to get round to reading it, but I think it was the religious aspects of this book that had always sort of put me off a little bit. It is packed to the gills with themes, and here are some of the ones I wrote down after reading it. We have life, death and beauty, Christian faith, mystery and ministry, memory and conviction, estrangement and reconciliation, and finally loneliness and love. The story is told through the eyes of a Midwestern minister nearing the end of his life in 1956. Gilead is written in the form of a letter to Reverend Ames' young son. We learn of the family's legacy, a heritage steeped in hardship and conflicting views on religion and war as each generation comes of age. It's really simple in its structure and its output, but it is so utterly philosophical and meditative. So what did I like and what didn't I like? What I liked. I absolutely adored the prose. It flows beautifully and utterly captured the voice of Reverend Ames. I was a little worried that this book was going to be very preachy in its religious output, but not at all. It makes faith and its valuable comprehensible to a non-believer. It doesn't try to convert, but shows the beauty of a believing world, and I liked it for that. I like the unreliability of Reverend Ames as a narrator. Little situations or stories or moments he's telling you about, and you are having to think about how actually he might be misinterpreting that moment. It just layered the story really well. It left loads of areas that needed to be examined just a little bit deeper. It's heartbreaking and beautifully balanced, and I genuinely feel like this is a type of book you could read once every 10 years and get something new from it. I do feel like the older you are, the more you are going to appreciate this book, the more it is going to resonate with you. It just forced me to examine my own life. It forced me to think about if I was to sit down and write a letter to a young person to describe my experiences, my life, and what guidance I could give them about being a good human being. Yeah, I just kept thinking about what would my version of this book look like, and I just enjoyed that it was forcing me to do that. What didn't I like? Two small things, and I wouldn't even really consider them dislikes, but because of the nature of this book, the way it's written, the style and form of letters to Reverend Ames's son, at times I felt like the world, the picture of the world that was being painted could have been pushed further. Now, Marilynne Robinson is doing a fantastic job of creating tone and a feeling, and within that tone and feeling I was able to let my imagination sort of bring things to life, but there's nothing overtly being really painted in the prose itself, and I know why it's not happening, because Reverend Ames isn't a writer. He's a man writing letters to his son, but yeah, at times I just wanted that element to be pushed a little bit more. And my second small little gripe is the character of Jack. I felt like he came into the story far too late. Now, if you've read this book, you will know who Jack is. But yeah, I just felt like this real emphasis was being put on him and the build towards the end. But I felt like I hadn't spent enough time with him. He just wasn't in it enough to feel like he warranted that kind of like build up. But yeah, it's just a small thing because I still got to connect to Jack. I think I just wanted a bit more time with him. And also, there are 4 books in this Gilead series of books, and I think the 4th one is entitled Jack. So I imagine that kind of lack of connection I was feeling is going to be expanded upon maybe in the other books, giving the whole series a more complete, a more well-rounded kind of feel. And as mentioned, those aren't really dislikes. They are very, very minor things. I was just sort of clutching at straws for kind of what would I have wanted a bit more of, and those are the 2 things that I kind of came up with. I'm going to say that this book is 4.5 stars out of 5. I thought it was excellent, in some moments utterly fantastic. But yeah, I feel like this is a book that is a much bigger book. Like all 4 books together, they are this story. They do paint this world. I mean, I haven't read them. They might not at all. But I feel like once I've finished all 4 of them, I might do a rating on the whole thing, because I feel like at the end, it's probably going to be 5 stars through and through. But for this story alone, I absolutely understand the hype. I really do. If you adore this book, you absolutely love it. I really do get it. And as mentioned, I think I'm going to read this again in 10 years' time, and it will probably become a 5-star. I think the more you read this with age, the more you're going to be able to relate to it, the more it's really going to hit you. Yeah, just excellent work. So there you go. Those are the 3 books I read whilst I was away working in Edinburgh. Have you read any one of these books? And if so, what did you think about them? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Please let me know in the comments below. I am now going to get back to what is the utterly average book along list this year. So more reviews coming up from reads on the long list very, very soon. But I'm so glad that I broke up the book along list with these books. Each one of these books is 1,000 times, and I mean 1,000 times better than anything on that long list. So, you know, I think it was needed. It's just, the long list is just so average. It's really getting me down, but I've committed now, so I feel like I have to keep going. I will keep going. I like to commit to things. Anyway, long outro. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all on the next one.